What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved icons walks onto a talk show and everything goes completely sideways? The Graham Norton Show has seen its fair share of unforgettable moments, but nothing could have prepared the audience for what unfolded when Julie Andrews made her appearance. Before we get into the chaos that erupted on that stage, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really went down. Now, let's dive into the most shocking talk show moment of the year. The studio lights were bright as always, the audience buzzing with anticipation. Graham Norton, ever the charming host, was in his element, working the crowd with his signature wit. When he announced his next guest, the applause was thunderous. Julie Andrews, the woman who had given the world Mary Poppins and Maria von Trapp, walked onto the stage with her trademark grace. She settled into the red chair, smoothing her dress as Graham leaned forward with that mischievous glint in his eye that regular viewers know all too well. Graham started off friendly enough, asking Julie about her recent projects and reminiscing about her legendary career. Julie was warm, engaging, sharing anecdotes that had the audience laughing in all the right places. But then Graham shifted gears. He brought up a topic that seemed innocent at first, a question about how she felt about modern remakes and reboots of classic films. Julie's expression changed subtly, a slight tightening around her eyes that most people might have missed. She said, "Well, Graham, I think there's something to be said for leaving certain stories in their original form. Not everything needs to be reimagined for a new generation. Some things are perfect as they are." Her voice was measured, controlled, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there moments before. Graham, sensing something interesting brewing, pressed forward. He said, "But surely you must feel some pride, knowing that your work has inspired so many new adaptations and interpretations. Isn't that the ultimate compliment, that people want to revisit these stories?" Julie tilted her head slightly, and when she spoke, her words were carefully chosen. She said, "There's a difference between inspiration and appropriation. There's a difference between honoring something and simply repackaging it because you've run out of original ideas. I've spent my entire career bringing authenticity to my roles, and I do wonder sometimes if that notion has been lost in today's industry." This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd expected. Graham, ever the professional, tried to keep things moving. He said, "That's quite a strong stance, Julie. Are you saying that modern filmmakers lack authenticity?" Julie leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs deliberately. She said, "I'm saying that when I was making films, we understood that our work would outlive us. We understood the responsibility that came with creating something meaningful. Today, it seems like everything is about the next viral moment, the next trending topic. Where's the artistry in that?" Graham raised his eyebrows, his smile still in place but his tone shifting ever so slightly. He said, "Well, you could argue that connecting with audiences in the digital age requires different skills. Isn't it a bit dismissive to say that modern creators don't understand artistry?" And that's when the temperature in the room really started to drop. Julie uncrossed her legs and sat forward, her posture changing from relaxed to something more confrontational. She said, dismissive, "Graham, I've been in this industry for over 6 decades. I've watched it evolve, and not all evolution is progress. When young actors today can't even perform a scene without checking their phones between takes, when singers rely entirely on auto-tune because they haven't trained their voices properly, that's not progress. That's decline." The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the tension radiating from the stage. Graham, to his credit, didn't back down. He said, "That sounds rather harsh, Julie. Surely you can acknowledge that the industry has also become more inclusive, more diverse, more willing to tell different kinds of stories." Julie's laugh was short and sharp. She said, "Inclusive. Let me tell you about inclusion. I worked with directors who had vision, who understood character and story. I worked alongside performers who had trained in theater, who understood their craft from the ground up. Now, we have people becoming famous for dancing in 15-second videos, and somehow that qualifies them to be in major motion pictures. That's not inclusion, that's a lowering of standards." Graham's face had lost some of its jovial warmth. He said, "I think a lot of people would disagree with you on that. Julie, many would say that opening doors to people from different backgrounds, with different paths to success, has enriched the industry." Julie waved her hand dismissively. She said, "Different paths. When I started, you paid your dues. You studied, you trained, you worked your way up. You didn't become a household name because you had a clever username on social media. The problem with your generation, Graham, and forgive me for being blunt, is that you've confused accessibility with talent. Just because anyone can post a video doesn't mean everyone should be making movies. Graham sat back, his expression hardening. He said, "My generation. Julie, I'm a broadcaster who has interviewed hundreds of people from all walks of life. I've seen incredible talent from places you might never expect. Are you really suggesting that the only valid path to success is the one you took?" Julie's eyes flashed. She said, "I'm suggesting that standards matter. Excellence matters. When you water everything down to make it accessible to everyone, you end up with mediocrity. And if that makes me old-fashioned, then so be it. I'd rather be old-fashioned and maintain integrity than be trendy and compromise everything I believe in." Caught between these two strong personalities facing off on live television, Graham leaned forward again, his voice cooler now. He said, "Integrity is an interesting word choice. Tell me, Julie, do you think everyone who disagrees with your view lacks integrity?" Julie met his gaze without flinching. She said, "I think people who lack conviction are easily swayed by whatever's popular at the moment. I think the industry has become more interested in pandering than in producing quality work. And yes, Graham, I think that includes shows like yours that prioritize viral moments over substantive conversation." That last line landed like a bomb. Graham's smile vanished completely. Graham's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. He said, "That's quite an accusation to make while sitting on my show. Julie, you do realize you're here to promote your own work, which rather suggests you need these so-called viral moments just as much as anyone else." Julie's expression didn't change. She said, "I'm here because my publicist insisted it would be good exposure. But let's be honest about what this is. Graham, you bring guests on, you ask them slightly provocative questions, hoping they'll say something quotable for social media, and then everyone moves on to the next thing. There's no depth, no real conversation. It's all surface-level entertainment designed for people with the attention span of a goldfish." The audience gasped audibly. Graham's face flushed red. He said, "If you feel that way, I'm curious why you agreed to come on at all. Surely someone of your stature could have simply declined the invitation." Julie smoothed her dress again, a gesture that now seemed more like armor than nervousness. She said, "Because I wanted to see if my suspicions were correct. And I must say, you're proving my point quite effectively. The moment I express an opinion that doesn't fit neatly into your format, you become defensive rather than engaging with the substance of what I'm saying." Graham shook his head, his professional composure cracking further. He said, "The substance of what you're saying, Julie, is that an entire generation of artists, creators, and performers are somehow less than, that their work doesn't measure up to yours. Do you not see how incredibly arrogant that sounds?" Julie's voice remained steady, almost eerily calm. She said, "It's not arrogance, it's observation. I've watched award shows where people win for performances that wouldn't have made it past an audition in my day. I've seen scripts greenlit because they have built-in audiences from existing franchises, rather than because they tell meaningful stories. The business has changed, Graham, and not for the better." Graham stood up from his chair, something he rarely did during interviews. He said, "You know what, Julie? Maybe the business has changed because audiences have changed. Maybe people want different things now. Maybe they're tired of being told what excellence looks like by people who refuse to acknowledge that the world has moved on." Julie remained seated, looking up at him with an expression that could only be described as pitying. She said, "Sitting down doesn't make you right, Graham, and standing up doesn't make you intimidating. The truth is uncomfortable, I understand that. But someone needs to say it. The industry is drowning in content and starving for quality." Graham ran his hand through his hair, clearly struggling to maintain control. He said, "Content. You mean the shows and films that millions of people connect with every day. The stories that make them laugh, cry, think. Just because something doesn't fit your narrow definition of quality doesn't make it worthless." Julie finally stood as well, facing him across the coffee table that separated them. She said, "I never said it was worthless. I said it was mediocre. There's a difference. People consume fast food every day too, Graham, but that doesn't make it nutritious. Just because something is popular doesn't make it good." The other guests on the couch, who had been silent throughout this exchange, looked at each other with wide eyes. One of them, a young actor promoting his new streaming series, shifted uncomfortably. Graham noticed and turned slightly toward him. He said, "Perhaps we should hear from someone who actually represents the current generation of performers. Do you have any thoughts on what Julie has been saying?" The young actor cleared his throat nervously. He said, I respect Dame Julie's work immensely. She's a legend. But I also think there's room for different approaches to storytelling. The industry I came up in is different from hers, but that doesn't make it invalid." Julie turned her attention to him, and her gaze was withering. She said, "Different approaches. You became famous playing a superhero in a film that was 90% computer-generated imagery. Tell me, what exactly did you bring to that role that required your specific talents? Couldn't they have cast almost anyone and achieved the same result with enough special effects?" The young actor's face went pale. He said, "That's not fair. Those roles require physical training, understanding the character's emotional journey, working with directors to bring a vision to life." Julie's laugh was cold. She said, "Physical training? You mean the stunt doubles who did most of your action sequences?" Emotional journey. The character had perhaps 3 emotions throughout the entire film. I'm not trying to be cruel, dear. I'm trying to illustrate a point. You're a symptom of exactly what I've been talking about. Graham stepped between them, his voice rising. He said, "That's enough, Julie. You don't get to come onto my show and attack my other guests. This has gone far beyond expressing an opinion. You're being deliberately hurtful." Julie's composure finally cracked, just slightly. Her voice rose to match his. She said, "Hurtful. You want to know what's hurtful, Graham? Watching an industry I dedicated my life to turn into a factory that churns out forgettable garbage. Seeing awards go to people who can't sing, can't act, can't do anything except look good on camera and recite lines that were written by committee. That's what's hurtful." Graham's voice was shaking now. He said, "You're out of line. You're completely out of line. I've had thousands of guests on this show, and never has anyone shown such contempt for their fellow performers. What gives you the right to judge everyone else's work?" Julie's eyes were blazing. She said, 6 decades of excellence gives me that right. Roles that people still watch and love 50 years later give me that right. The fact that I can actually sing without computerized assistance gives me that right. I earned my place at the top, Graham. I didn't have it handed to me because I had the right look or the right connections, or because I went viral." The audience was in complete shock, some people with their hands over their mouths, others filming on their phones despite the no recording policy. Graham pointed toward the wings. He said, "I think it's time for you to leave. This interview is over." Julie didn't move. She said, "Of course it is. The moment someone speaks an uncomfortable truth, you shut them down. That's very on brand for you, Graham. Can't have anything disrupting the carefully crafted image of fun and frivolity." Graham's voice dropped to something dangerous. He said, "I'm asking you to leave my show." Now Julie picked up her purse from beside the chair. She said gladly, "I've said what I came to say. Whether any of you choose to listen is entirely up to you. But mark my words, in 20 years, no one will remember most of the people you've had sitting in these chairs. They'll remember me, though. They'll remember what real talent looks like." She turned to walk off the stage, but Graham's voice stopped her. He said, "You're right about one thing, Julie. People will remember this. They'll remember you coming on here and revealing exactly who you really are. Not the practically perfect governess, not the singing nun, but someone so consumed by their own legacy that they can't see past their own ego." Julie turned back, and for the first time, there was something like genuine anger in her expression rather than cold disdain. She said, "Ego. You want to talk about ego? You've built an entire career on getting drunk with celebrities and encouraging them to make fools of themselves for ratings." Graham took a step closer, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. He said, "At least I celebrate people. Julie, at least I create a space where artists feel welcome, where they can be themselves, where they can share their work with an audience that actually wants to hear from them. What do? You sit in judgment like some kind of gatekeeper deciding who's worthy and who isn't." Julie's voice was ice. She said, "Someone has to maintain standards. Graham, if we don't, if we just applaud everything equally regardless of quality, then what's the point? Why should anyone strive for excellence if mediocrity gets the same recognition? You're not celebrating people, you're enabling laziness." The young actor who had been attacked earlier found his voice again. He said, "You know what? Dame Julie. Maybe the reason you're so bitter is because you can't accept that the world doesn't revolve around your definition of success anymore. Maybe it scares you that people can find their own paths now, that they don't need to follow the exact same route you did. Julie whirled on him. She said, "Bitter? I'm not bitter, I'm disappointed. Disappointed that people like you are held up as the future of this industry. You haven't earned anything. You were handed a franchise role because you fit a certain demographic the studio wanted to appeal to. Your acting is passable at best. Your range is limited. And yet you're treated like the second coming simply because teenage girls find you attractive." The young actor stood up now, too, his face red. He said, "You don't know anything about my journey. You don't know how hard I worked to get where I am. Just because it looked different from your path doesn't mean it wasn't difficult. Doesn't mean I didn't earn it." Julie's eyebrows rose. She said, "Your journey? You were discovered on a social media platform doing comedy sketches in your bedroom. You auditioned for one role and got it because you had followers. That's not a journey, that's a lottery ticket." Graham moved between them again. He said, "Julie, I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you, leave now, or I will have security escort you out." Julie looked at him with something approaching pity. She said, "There it is. The ultimate response when you can't win an argument. Threaten to remove the person saying things you don't want to hear. Very mature, Graham. Very professional." Graham's jaw clenched. He said, "Professional? You want to lecture me about professionalism? You've spent the last 20 minutes insulting me, insulting my show, insulting my other guests. You've turned what should have been a pleasant conversation into a spectacle. And for what? To prove some point about how superior you are." Julie's voice remained calm, which only seemed to infuriate Graham more. She said, "I'm not trying to prove I'm superior. The work speaks for itself. I'm simply refusing to pretend that everything is wonderful when it clearly isn't. Someone needs to have the courage to say that the emperor has no clothes, even if it makes people uncomfortable." Another guest on the couch, a comedian who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, spoke up. She said, "Maybe the issue isn't that standards have dropped, Dame Julie. Maybe the issue is that the standards you're measuring against are outdated. Art evolves, culture evolves, and what resonated 50 years ago might not be what resonates now. That doesn't make it worse, just different." Julie turned her gaze to the comedian. She said, spoken like someone who benefits from the current system, "Tell me, dear, how many of your comedy specials rely on shock value rather than actual wit? How much of your material is just saying outrageous things for the sake of being outrageous?" The comedian's expression hardened. She said, "My material reflects the world I live in. It connects with people who see themselves in my stories. Not everyone grew up in the golden age of Hollywood, Dame Julie. Some of us had to find our own way, create our own opportunities." Julie shook her head slowly. She said, "And you all think that's admirable? You think that because you didn't follow traditional paths, you're somehow more authentic, more real. But what you're really doing is lowering the bar so far that anyone can step over it. You're creating a culture where effort is optional, where talent is secondary to marketability." Graham's voice was hoarse now. He said, "You genuinely believe that, don't you? You genuinely think that your way is the only valid way. It must be lonely, Julie, living in a world where you're the only one who understands what real art is." Julie met his eyes directly. She said, "It's not lonely, Graham. It's clarifying. I don't need validation from people who confuse popularity with quality. I don't need applause from audiences who have been trained to accept whatever scraps the industry throws at them. I know what I achieved, and I know it will outlast everything happening now." Graham's laugh was bitter. He said, "You're so certain of that. But what if you're wrong? What if the films and shows you're dismissing actually do endure? What if future generations look back at this era and see it as a renaissance, while your work becomes a quaint relic of a bygone age? Have you ever considered that possibility?" Julie's expression suggested she hadn't and wouldn't. She said, "That won't happen because quality always rises to the top, eventually. Trends fade, Graham. Viral moments disappear. But artistry, real artistry, that remains. People will still be watching The Sound of Music when whatever superhero nonsense is popular this week has been completely forgotten." The young actor couldn't contain himself anymore. He said, "You keep saying that, but you're basing it on nothing. You're just assuming that because you were successful, your kind of success is the only kind that matters. Maybe people will remember both. Maybe there's room for all of it." Julie's smile was patronizing. She said, "There's room for all of it, the same way there's room for both gourmet cuisine and fast food. Technically, they both exist, but one is clearly superior to the other. One requires skill, training, artistry. The other requires assembly and marketing." Graham threw his hands up. He said, "This is pointless. You're not interested in a conversation, Julie. You're interested in a sermon. You want everyone to sit here and nod along while you explain how much better you are than everyone else. Well, I'm not doing it. My audience deserves better than this." Julie picked up her purse again. She said, "Your audience deserves the truth, Graham. Whether they get it or not is up to you. But I've said my piece. I won't apologize for having standards or for expecting the industry I love to maintain some level of excellence. If that makes me unpopular, so be it." She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the studio floor. Graham called after her. He said, "You know what your problem is, Julie? You're so busy looking backward that you can't see forward. You're so obsessed with how things were that you can't appreciate what they could become. That's not wisdom. That's stubbornness." Julie paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one final time. She said, "And your problem, Graham, is that you're so desperate to be liked, so eager to celebrate everything and everyone, that you've forgotten it's okay to have discernment. It's okay to say that some things are better than others. But you won't, because that might hurt someone's feelings. That might make you less popular. And we can't have that, can we?" The two of them stared at each other across the studio, the audience frozen, the other guests silent. Finally, Julie turned and walked off the stage completely. Graham stood there, his chest heaving, his face flushed. He looked at the camera, then at his remaining guests, then back at the camera. He said, "Well, that certainly wasn't what we had planned for today. I apologize to everyone watching, and to my other guests who had to witness that. Sometimes these things happen in live television." He sat back down heavily in his chair, running his hands over his face. The comedian reached over and patted his shoulder. The young actor looked shaken. The energy in the studio had shifted entirely, the fun atmosphere replaced by something uncomfortable and tense. Graham tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. So there you have it, one of the most explosive moments in talk show history. A clash between old Hollywood and new, between tradition and evolution. Between two people who simply couldn't find common ground. What do you think? Did Julie Andrews have valid points about the state of the industry? Or was Graham Norton right to defend the new generation of performers? Make sure you subscribe to stay updated on more stories like this, and drop a comment below answering this question. If you could ask either Julie or Graham one question about what happened, what would it be?